Welcome! In this video, we'll take a look at a new invoicing enhancement in the 57 release that controls what happens with new resaleable sourced parts that are returned at point of sale. Instead of always adding them to the shelf or to a manifest, you're now able to decide at the time of the return how the return should be handled. So we'll start on the Controls Invoice Options screen with a new Purchase Forward Return Destination control that's used to handle resaleable returns of items sold with the P and the F modifiers. The setup defaults to prompt and also allows selection of shelf and manifest, and only used when the parts sold with the P or F modifier are returned. If the control is set to shelf, when a part is returned, the return will always be added to the shelf and the quantity available will be affected. If it's set to manifest, then the returns will always be added to the appropriate manifest. And if it's set to prompt, a prompt displays, letting you decide whether to return the part to the shelf or to put it on a manifest for the vendor it was purchased from and not increase the quantity available. So let's go to point of sale, and since Purchase Forward Return Destination set to shelf and manifest are pretty straightforward, let's return a part with the control set to prompt. I'll start the return, and I'll select Return to Manifest, and when set to prompt or to manifest, if the existing return product message at point of sale flag on the Invoice Options Return tab is checked, the Return to Vendor prompt will display to let you know that the part's being added to the manifest. Previously, this prompt only impacted defective returns. I left it enabled so you could see the extra pop-up. You may not need to enable the return product message at point of sale when you set the sourced return destination field to prompt. And here's my part on the manifest. Okay, next we'll look at returns for parts that are sourced with the buyout and dropship modifiers. Now, when items are sourced, the system tracks the vendor source type of outside suppliers or company stores depending on the item was sourced. We can best see this in the Lisa Transactions report. And a control named Sourced Return Destination on the Supplier Order Specific screen is used to handle resaleable returns of items that were sold using the buyout and dropship modifiers. The Sourced Return Destination drop-down has the same three values as the Purchased Forward Return Destination control that we just looked at: manifest, shelf, and prompt, and this one defaults to shelf. Now we'll look at how the source type and the sourced return destination controls handle buyout and dropship returns. If the source type of the original sale was a company store, then the sourced return destination setup is used to determine how to handle sourced returns. If the sale was sourced from a supplier, the sourced return destination drop-down value for that supplier is used. And if sourced from a line acting as a supplier, all buyout and dropship returns will go to the shelf. The sourced return destination setup is ignored. So if you want more control of returns sourced from a line, then create a supplier for the line to get the results you need. Neither the source type nor the sourced return destination looks at line codes acting as suppliers. Now let's look at what happens during a return at point of sale, depending on the sourced return destination setup. If the sourced return destination dropdown is set to prompt, a prompt opens to determine how to handle the return. If the return was sourced from a sister store, the prompt shows the location number. If it's from a supplier, it'll show the supplier code. And it also shows buyout or dropship, depending on the modifier used on the original sale. And I'll select Return to the Shelf. And if the sourced return destination is set to manifest, the returned items will always be added to the appropriate manifest. And if the sourced return destination is set to return to shelf, the quantity available will be increased for the part, and a prompt does not display, since returns will always be added to the shelf. Now let's look at one more thing before we're done. Regardless of the sourced return destination drop-down value, when buyout or dropship sourced items are returned and restocking fees are enabled, you'll get the restocking fee pop-up. And if a return is done against the invoice that was auto-sourced, the crediting a sourced item pop-up displays to ask if the vendor didn't have the item or the customer refused it. And if the vendor didn't have it, a pop-up doesn't display and the item isn't put on the shelf or on the manifest, since the choice indicates that the item was never picked up and the return is being done only to credit the customer for an item the store and customer never received. And if the item was refused by the customer, then you'll be prompted to add the item to stock or to a manifest. And if you return to a manifest and the return product message at point of sale flag is checked, the return to vendor pop-up opens for information only. So again, it's not recommended that you enable the return product message when you set the sourced return destination field to prompt. And that's it for the sourced returns functionality added in the 57 release. If you have questions, please check F1 Help or contact customer support for assistance. And thanks for joining us.